How's it going, everyone? Welcome to this week's Q&A. So like any other week, if you want a chance at one of your questions being answered, make sure you do drop a comment down below with your question, and it'll either be featured in a video later on or in the comment itself, or I'll make a dedicated video for it. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with the first question of the week. And it is, if you purchase your car at X dealer, can you go and get it serviced at Y dealer? And the simple answer is yes. You could get your car serviced anywhere that is a Honda or Acura service center. Obviously, if it's Honda, you go to Honda. If it's Acura, you go to Acura. Doesn't matter, as long as it wasn't something that was, for instance, you bought the car knowing that it had that issue, and the dealer knew it had that issue, and they promised to fix that issue for you, something that may not be warrantyable, maybe a scratch or something like that. That's going to have to be directly with that dealer that you purchased the vehicle with. Now, I get asked this question quite often, and a lot of people purchase the car, again, at X dealer, don't like their service department, and just assume that you have to take it there for your services. And again, the simple answer is no, you can take it to any dealer. So we get cars from different dealers all the time, and we can't just refuse them or deny them because they got their car, once again, purchased somewhere else. So that being said, hopefully that answers the question for you. All right, so next question is, this person travels quite often and for a long period of time. Vehicle sits for 6 or more months. What should you do before and after? So it really depends on your situation. You should definitely either disconnect the battery or get a battery tender for it. If, again, you could, obviously, if you park your car on the street, then that's going to be very hard for you to do. Also, you should overinflate your tires to about maybe 60 psi or so, just to keep them as sturdy as possible, and try to avoid getting some flat spots on them. Now, it may not completely reduce that or eliminate that, but it could reduce it. So we do see that a lot when cars sit on our lot for X amount of times, which hasn't been an issue really lately, but for a while there it was, and customers would come in with a vibration, and it was from a flat spot. So now your rotors are also going to get rusted. So there's nothing really you can do to prevent this. Maybe you could try and cover your tires up with some sort of tire cover if you park your car outside, but obviously that's going to draw a lot of attention. So if you park your car in your garage and you're traveling, so the battery maintenance minder will be a lot easier, and you won't have to deal with weather and affecting the rotors and rusting them out. And you could even put the car on jack stands and have them to avoid those flat spot situations once again. Now, if you're parking your car on the street, obviously I'm going to recommend, again, overinflating the tires, and then you get back, bring them back down to the recommended PSI for that car and that tire. And you should probably get your rotors resurfaced if you're in an area that gets a lot of rain during that time period. Rotors are just going to rust, and there's nothing going to be able to do about it. We see a lot of times people go on vacation, they come back, and then immediately after that they have a thumping noise coming from the brakes, and the brake pad just got stuck to that rotor, and just once they go to drive off the car, it kind of peels off some of that brake pad and it's stuck to the rotor, and now you're getting this thumping noise. So a lot of times we'll have to get the rotors resurfaced, sometimes get the pads changed depending on how the severe the situation is. So those are just some tips. Obviously, try to have somebody move the car if they could for you. Again, it depends on your situation, but just a couple ideas that you should be doing before and after. You don't really have to do anything with maintenance. If it's just sitting there, it's not really going to go bad or anything like that. Now, if it's out in the sun, maybe you want to get a car cover, or out in the elements, that might help also with some of this moisture on the rotors as well. So just a couple of different ideas, and it really depends on your situation and your parking situation for that purpose. So with that being said, hopefully that answers the question for you. All right, so the next question is changing the transmission fluid, specifically automatic transmissions, on a car that maybe you just purchased, you don't know the service history, and it has 100,000 miles, for example, or a decent amount of miles. So I probably would, first thing we'll do is obviously see if it's driving good, if it's shifting good, no harsh engagements or anything like that, no thumps, anything of that nature. Next thing you will do is look at the dipstick Obviously, if it has one, some of these cars don't have dipsticks anymore. So it's really a fine line here because if the vehicle hasn't had any transmission services, it comes to a point where it's just better off leaving the original fluid in there versus changing it. A lot of times people come off the street into the dealership, first time there, 150,000 miles, requesting just a transmission service. Automatically, that's a red flag for me, and it almost seems like a setup. So first thing I do is I test drive it. If it has, again, high mileage, and if it's shifting wacky already, I'll 100% advise against it. Now, if it's shifting good, no harsh engagements, again, everything that I already previously said, I'll still advise them that there's still a risk that the fluid is, X dark. And I probably wouldn't do it. If they want to do it, it's all on them. And there's a chance that this could cause more harm than good. So again, it really depends on the situation here. But if the vehicle's shifting good, no harsh engagement or anything like that, you'll probably be okay. Now, if it's a red ATF, like most Hondas or a lot of them, or even CVT, and it's the CVT, the problem with that is we don't have a dipstick on most of them. So 6ATs, they still have a dipstick, and you can look at them. If the fluid is extra dark, I probably would advise against it. Although if it's still shifting okay, it may be okay. It's always, kind of just shooting a dart there and seeing what happens afterwards. So I would definitely proceed with caution, but if it's shifting and driving okay, you might be okay. But again, there's always that chance. So hopefully that answers the question for you. All right, so the next question is, what are some symptoms of a failing VSA system? And other than a light being on a dashboard, 9 out of 10 times the car is going to drive just fine up until there is a panic stop. So most times VSA light comes on due to a bad ABS pump, a wheel speed sensor, etc., etc. Sometimes a steering angle sensor, which is kind of common as well. Now, once again, it'll drive just fine most cases up until you need to do a panic stop. At that point, it may or may not work correctly. So most common failures are, like I said, wheel speed sensors or ABS pumps or steering angle sensors. That's most stuff that we do see. Sometimes it's due to some rodent damage. Sometimes somebody took out, something, didn't put it back on correctly. But most times it is just a mechanical or electrical failure. And a lot of times it is ABS pumps, specifically on a certain year Accords. For some reason, they just fail a lot. So some things you could do, obviously I have no proof of this, but changing your brake fluid pretty often, every 2 to 3 years or every 30 to 45,000 miles, will help eliminate some of that moisture in there, and that could be promoting some of the rust and maybe causing these solenoids to stick. So it's a good common practice. It's fairly inexpensive to get done, or you could even do it yourself. I have a video I made a couple weeks back. I can link that in the description below to try to avoid some of these issues. But other than the light being on, most times, again, unless if you come to a panic stop, you're not going to notice any difference in driving habits in a vehicle. So hopefully that answers the question for you. All right, so last but not least, question of the week, dealing with rusted bolts and threads in areas that are prone to rusting conditions. So obviously here in Jersey, we do have a decent amount of rust. Nothing like upstate New York or Canadians, but I feel the pain for you guys. But yeah, we do deal with some rust, and we have some recalls specific for the rust, etc. So some tools I like to use are the bolt buster, which works really, really great. It's just an inductive tool, and it heats up the surface area really nice, and most times without any damage. It is fairly expensive, although it is super nice to use. Some oils or penetrating oils that I like to use are Croil, which again I could also link in the description below. And my personal favorite is a 50-50 mix of ATF and acetone, and that usually breaks the rust away pretty good. Also, brake fluid, believe it or not, is good for those things as well. Obviously, if you have you get your hands on a torch, that is probably going to be the best thing, although that could cause some damage to the surrounding areas, so you really have to be careful with that. I also like to use a chaser, not a die or a tap. A chaser just cleans the threads, doesn't really cut or anything like that. I like to use that on anything that's like an external bolt and the nut goes through it, and I can see the threads and I can clean them. That's really nice. Also, if I go to pull out a bolt and it's really rusted, I like to run a chaser through it just to kind of clean up some of that rust, blow away some of the rust that I just broke up. and putting everything back together, especially suspension wise. I like to use some grease, just as a barrier there to prevent from the two metals, rusting together. We see a lot of rust with suspension bolts, hubs, the bolt-on styles. And it is frustrating, and Honda doesn't pay anything extra for that. So anytime we have to drop an exhaust or suspension work or anything like that, sometimes we spend more time on just taking out those specific items versus actually doing the job that we're, being done. Another good tool to use is those easy outs where they grip onto a nut or a bolt that the threads, the original size, for example, was a 14 millimeter, and the rust has eaten away at it, dropping it down to like a 13 or a 12 with some dull edges as well. That stuff works really, really great, especially if you use hand tools. They don't like impact tools for that stuff, but just some stuff that we do and works really well. Obviously, if you're in an area where it is rust prone and you get a lot of snow, then, some preventative maintenance there, like washing the car immediately after a snowstorm or, within a day or two, and treating it with undercoating works great as well, just to kind of keep everything from rusting as much as possible. So with that being said, I'll catch everyone on the next one.